Hey, I'm Jolt. Welcome back to the Sketch Your Mind conference recordings. We're now at session 12 out of 16, and this one is a treat. Two fantastic creators in one session, Jono Hey and Oliver Caviglioli. If you're new to the series, you'll find all the resources linked below, including the big Excalibur whiteboard where I'm collecting notes from every session. Both Jono and Oliver have shared their slides. You'll find the links in the description on the whiteboard and on the conference site. Now, a few words about today's guests. Jono is the creator of Sketchplanations, his long-running project that turns complex ideas into simple, memorable visuals. His work has been featured everywhere, including Bill Gates recommending his book, Big Ideas, Little Pictures. He's spent more than a decade refining how to explain things clearly, one drawing at a time. Oliver comes from a background in teaching and school leadership. After a pivotal moment at a Viz Think conference, he developed a structured visual language for education, designing books, how-to guides, posters, and visual systems used across schools and organizations. His work blends design discipline with deep communication clarity. This session is wonderfully meta. Jono opens with a story behind Sketchplanations, how it started, how he chooses ideas, and what he's learned from publishing hundreds of explanations. While Jono talks, Oliver creates a live sketch note of the presentation in real time. In the second half, Oliver walks us through his sketch, explaining the thinking, preparation, and structure that allowed him to capture the talk live without losing clarity. At the end of this video, you'll hear the music I composed for this session. If you'd like to support my work, you can get the conference album, join the next visual thinking workshop, grab my book, Sketch Your Mind, or try the Obsidian Excalibur plugin. All the links are in the description below. And now, enjoy Jono's story and Oliver's live sketchnoting.
Super. Thank you so much, Zoltan. Thanks so much for having me and for everybody for joining. And as Zoltan mentioned, a little bit of this was like telling the story of this project that I've been working on. So there's a bit of autobiographical stuff, but also I wanted to share some of the lessons that I've learned along the way, which you may find useful as you go. And just because I thought this is perhaps the right crowd for it, if I come over here, this was something I used to always do at conferences. You'll find very quickly that most of my thoughts are all in sketches, but I always used to start every conference with 3 little mind maps in the corners. One was questions, one was people I'd like to meet, and one was ideas or actions that I was going to take as a result. So maybe that's something you could do or try for this and the remaining sessions. And there's also the Q&A. So I wanted to start with a story which really brought it was kind of an aha moment to me. So I did a PhD in UC Berkeley in the States, and I was in the engineering school. But one of the great things about doing a PhD there was that you could take classes across any department you wanted, as long as you had spare credits to do that. And I remember taking classes in the education department, which really fascinated to me. And the standard way of doing a class there was you were handed a bunch of reading. And so you went and did all this reading, and then you came around and you sat around a table and you talked about the reading. And you talked for an hour and you thought, this was a really interesting conversation. And we all thought we were very intelligent and thinking of all these nuanced and subtle things. And then I'd walk out from these conversations and I'd realize I couldn't really remember all the interesting stuff that we'd had in this conversation. And that's essentially my experience with this person on the left here, which is these long conversations. You go, okay, well, what did I get from that, and what's actually going to stick with me. And I think that's very much the same thing people experience with books. So my two questions, which really underpin all of this project and this talk, is like, have you ever struggled to get your message across? And then at the same time, have you ever struggled to remember what you learned particularly from a book? I don't know if you've had this feeling, which I certainly have, which is you read a book and you're like, that was really interesting. What a lot of cool stuff I learned. Somebody asks you about the book and you say, yeah, it was a really interesting book. You'll have to read it. And you've forgotten all the stuff that you learned. And so I want to stop that, and I want to remember what I learned, and I want to always get my message across. And so that's part of what the genesis of this project. So if you don't know it, I'll tell the story of how I got there. But this is the project at sketchplanations.com. It is a slow individual project of, I call it explaining the world one sketch at a time. So each one of these is a small sketch explaining a new idea, and I'm trying to explain it as succinctly as I can using visuals. And it's been going for 12, 13 years now, and there's a lot of them that you can go check out, and we'll talk a little bit about how I got there through this talk. One of the things that I wanted to do both in this talk, but also I think actually underpins how I work with Sketchplanations, is this thing about ask the question at talks. Here's my little cartoon of it. Is somebody giving a talk and he's talking about TLA usage, and somebody finally puts up their hand and says, what's a TLA? And everybody else actually was, thank goodness somebody's asked that, because they all assume that everybody else knows. So first of all, please, if you have questions, don't assume that everybody else knows it, because they probably don't too, and they'll be grateful for a question. But it's also very much, when I think about what topics I'm going to cover for Sketchplanations, I often think, well, hang on, if I was curious about that, if that was interesting or new to me, maybe it's going to be curious or interesting to somebody else. And so that's really one of the things that drives what gets in and what's not. So for example, here's this random thing, and actually a lot of people found this useful. So we'll see. So let's talk about what an example Sketchplanation is. This is probably one of my most enduringly popular ones. I don't know if you've seen it before. It's called the fun scale. It came from, well, I learned it from my brother, and he learned it from a mountain guide. And the aha moment for me was when he talked about the fun scale. I was like, what are you talking about, fun scale? There's only fun, right? You're either having fun or you're not having fun. He says, no, there's three types of fun. There's type 1 fun, and these are things which are fun to do and fun to remember. So that's things like going skiing or eating ice cream. You just want to keep doing these things, and it's lovely when you think back about how much fun you had doing those. And then you've got type 2 fun, and these things are interesting, because sometimes there might be something like climbing a mountain where maybe you had to get up really early and you were really exhausted as you were going through it. Or maybe you were doing training for a half marathon or a marathon. And so they actually often hurt a bit to do. But actually, when you think back on them, you have very positive experiences of that, and they're fun in retrospect. So that's type 2 fun. And these are often the most fulfilling in the long run. And then you have type 3 fun, which I've illustrated here with going on a hike and getting accosted by a bear, which actually weren't fun at the time. And if you think back to them, you're like, oh my God, I can't believe we did that. That was terrible. But they always make a great story. Anyway, you get the idea that this is a Sketchplanation, a fairly typical one, I'd say, which I think is interesting. I was watching Zolt's initial talk, and he really talked about there's writing and there's visuals, and people sometimes say to me, well, yours are not very visual, and that's true. I have a lot of words on my sketches, and it's really that combination of words and drawings which makes it work for me. So we're going to go back again. My training was engineering and product design. This is anybody know what this is? No, that's fair enough. This is sorry, I didn't explain TLA. Yeah, TLA is an in joke of a 3-letter acronym. This is a CAD drawing of a roller bearing, and this is the sort of thing you do in engineering and design, which is you're trying to take some idea you have in your head and you're trying to physicalize it as best you can to communicate it to others and check that you can build it and things. And I always think the best example of this, and my personal hero, and I don't know if it's anybody else's, but is this chap, Leonardo da Vinci. And many things I like about Leonardo da Vinci, but clearly, he was this amazing polymath where obviously he was incredible at art, but he was also amazing sort of scientist. These are some of his anatomy drawings, and he was an amazing engineer and designer. And so these, incredible mechanisms here. And by all accounts, he was also a musician and very athletic and good looking. So he had all the attributes. But what I really love about his notebooks, and what always inspires me when I look at them, is that it's very much art for a purpose, which I think is a lot of the essence of this conference. Is like, it's not art for the sake of art. Here he's exploring his thinking as he goes. It's kind of, you look at his notebooks and it's like a voyeur view into his mind as he's working through things. And so he was always my hero, but on the other hand, he's an individual. So I was always fascinated. Now, how do you be creative like Leonardo da Vinci? Clearly, I'm going to combine art and science and all of this stuff and put it together. And when I was researching and thinking about product design, this was a much more typical scenario. It was actually, most things are done in teams. And when you're working on a problem, each of the people that you're sat with brings their own view of things to the table. So, somebody's thinking about here the electrical engineering, how we're going to build it, what's it going to look like, the ergonomics, and so on. And a real classic visual, which I don't know if you've come across before, one of these ones that I've drawn similar things, but I wish I'd drawn this one, is this example here. It's from Luke Barrett and is in a great book, software book called User Story Mapping by Jeff Patton. It starts in the top left, where essentially you've got three different people and they all think that they agree, but actually what they're thinking about are different things. And it's only when you try and make that thinking explicit, by, in this case, putting it on the board, that everybody realizes they actually had different assumptions and different ideas and different conceptions of what was going on. And so it's this sort of visualizing and making explicit the differences in our thinking, which allows them in the subsequent panels to get on the same page. And that's really what I saw so much. And I think often what I'm trying to, I guess, fight both in my day job at work, we're building products, but also in Sketchplanations to try and get clear on concepts. And so we can all get on the same page about things. One of the nicest ways of phrasing it that I've seen was from Larry Keeley, who's an IIT professor, and he calls it cutting cubes out of fog, which is this sort of blurry start to a process. And what you're trying to do is bring structure and visualize this so that we can all interrogate it and make sense of it. And I've always been very visual in my job, product design and engineering. This is us at Jump Associates. And you can see we're here where you're working in a team. What we do routinely was you're trying to make your thinking visible to everybody in the team. And so that's actually me like working on some of the concepts we have, but you can also see the user research that everybody can interrogate. And there's very little which is left just floating in people's heads. It's like a job of getting it out onto the page. But I also practiced it individually. We've had loads of amazing, talented people during this conference, and I've no doubt that many people attending are exactly the same. This is us from our travels, and I used, visualizing and mind maps and things for a travel journal, which is also a lovely thing to do. Sat with a beer at the end of the day to reflecting on what were the fun bits of your day and combining again words and pictures. And then, I've had my fair share of time also doing sketchnoting. So, book summaries, for example, or summaries of talks. And actually the one on the right is a Sketchplanation I did of some of the things I learned about visual recording. And visual recording was very much not just listen to a talk and get it down so that you have a record of it, but also during a real-time conversation with many people in the room, we'd have a big board and somebody would be working on that, structuring and visualizing the points of the conversation that people could see during the discussion. And then that would change the discussion. It would allow people to hinge their thoughts on it. And so all of this is to say that, I spent a lot of time in different facets of making things visual. And I worked as a UX designer for a long time. And sadly, my drawing during my day job ended up much more like this. And I don't know if many people have experienced this, where you might be lots of fluid, expressive drawing in perhaps your personal life, and then your day job ends up drawing boxes and arrows. And turning it into software, which is essentially boxes and arrows, which was a bit sad. And so alongside this sort of visual journey that I was going on, my sister bought me for one Christmas this book, One Sketch a Day, a visual journal. And you know what? I really recommend it. It's still possible to buy, so you can go look this up online. As you can see, it's a bit battered because I carried it around, and it's really super simple. It's literally just got 365 spaces for a sketch, and I literally set about for that entire year doing one little tiny sketch a day in this book. And you can see that they're not at all accomplished. Some of them are really quick, some of them are a bit long, and they're not for anybody else. They were just for me. But it was a really interesting exercise of both doing something as a real regular habit, doing something one a day, and actually a chance to sort of practice my visualizing, which was great. But when I got to the end of this thing, I thought, well, that's a shame to not be doing some more of this. But also I had this sense that, here I was drawing these visuals, but they weren't actually useful to anybody. So I was thinking, well, how can I make a useful skill out of this? How can I get better at something? So it came to me that it would be useful to be able to explain things in sketches. And so my next thing was, for the following year, I got these little tiny little moleskin storyboard notebooks, which I really like. And you can see that they're really similar to the Sketch a Day journal. And so that's a real page of them, and I've got a bunch of them here. They're beautiful things to look back on. And so I set about going, okay, well, I'll take a new concept each day, and I'll try and explain that. And you can see that I used a very simple palette, which I still end up today. So it's just a few pens I had in my pocket and a shader, essentially a Copic marker. And that was actually my constraints. It's got to fit in this box. It's got to be able to do one a day. And I'm going to just use these 3-4 colors. How can I make this work? And that was a brilliant thing to do for a year. And so that got me started. And as I started posting these things, actually, I put a little website together. Well, first of all, on Facebook, but secondly, Tumblr was the cool thing of the day. So I started a Tumblr, and then I put a MailChimp mailing list, and people signed up for these, which was great. And that was really the genesis of the project and the newsletter as it is today. Once I got to the end of the year of doing one a day, which I can tell you is quite a challenge. It was lots of lonely lunches going off by myself to go do my sketch, or even catch up on the sketch I should have done yesterday. I switched to, first of all, to 2 a week, and that was a disaster, because if you got 2 a week, you can always do one tomorrow. There's no specific time you should be doing one. So eventually I changed it to 1 a week, and I've been doing that ever since for the last 12, 13 years or so. And I'll give you some examples of sort of different types of things I try and explain and cover, and the different styles I get to experiment with, because I'm doing this every week. And I'm also trying to share some concepts that I like, because these are fun and they stick with me. So here's one: emotional hot potato, which I learned from a parenting book. This is how a bad mood can spread between people. So obviously in this case, I went for a little cartoon thing, but I'm always trying to do it essentially in one picture. An emotional hot potato is somebody has a really bad day at work. They get a ticking off by the boss. They come back, they complain to their spouse, and they're rude to them. And then the spouse is grumpy now and is rude to the kids. And then the big kid just kicks around the little kid. And then the kid is rude to the dog, and the dog doesn't know what's going on and pees on the carpet. And so that's emotional hot potato, which I'm trying to explain here, and trying to use things, again, the really simple palette, and how do I communicate these are the same people, and what props you might need to do, how can this work in different languages and things like that. Another one, maybe more from my professional life, these are the sorts of concepts I end up sharing because they're so useful. They've been so useful to me. This is one from Paul Graham. He calls it manager schedule, maker schedule. But I preferred manager time, maker time. And you probably recognize this thing, which is, if you've been a manager, you spend a lot of time essentially living by the calendar. And so there's no question about what you're going to do next. It's like, okay, well, what's next on the calendar? At 10:30, I'm meeting this person. Okay, I've got half an hour to do this. Whereas maker time is where you need that deep work to focus on something and really make progress on a project. And actually, if somebody puts in a 10:30 meeting in the middle of a morning, it can really mess up much of your day, because you really wanted to get deep into this thing. It's the sort of thing I'd have working with engineers a lot, where they'd have one meeting in their diary all week and miss it, whereas a manager's making 50 of them. But it's because they're deep in maker time. So these are concepts that I've found useful and I wanted to explain. And then here's perhaps an example of where it probably worked best. This is the curb cut effect, and remarkably, many people have picked this up. They put it in books and things like that. And I think it's still doing its job today. And the curb cut effect is essentially this idea of when we design for disabilities, we make things better for everyone. And so you can see here what I've tried to do is show that the drop in the curb between the pavement and the road, which was essentially to help the person in the wheelchair, actually has a benefit for all these other users of the road, the delivery man, the person with the pushchair, the people on the bikes, the skateboard, the elderly, somebody pulling a suitcase. And then trying to do this in a simple way as possible that you can get as much as you can from the text. And I don't have to read an essay or listen to a podcast before I get the essence of this idea. And then finally, this is obviously a very different sort of style one, but sometimes I find there's an idea, because my book was called Big Ideas, Little Pictures, but there's an idea that means a lot to me or that I want to just get across. And what I'm really trying to do is inspire and share a feeling, or share a feeling of me being inspired by something. And so then it's fun to sort of try and dial up the artwork and spend more time on that to get across not just a concept, but a feeling alongside this idea. And so I've ended up with a number of these kind of things. And you'll probably notice that along the ones I've looked at today, they really vary enormously. They cover all sorts of different facets of our lives. And one of the things I believe in very strongly is that none of us are one-dimensional. And yes, we might be, a UX designer or an author or an engineer in our day job, but we're also a parent, a football player, a yoga fanatic. We have all of these different sides to us. And I think we can be interested in all these things. And so whenever I'm thinking about whether this makes a good sketchplanation, I think, well, you know what? I like to be able to, share this constellation with my son just as much as I like to share this management technique with somebody at work. So for me, that goes in the pot, and that's fair game for a sketch. Cool. So I just wanted to come to the final bit, and then we can go to questions. And we have Oliver's drawing. I know how on earth you draw when there's so many drawings in a talk already. But some of the lessons that have really helped me as I've come along and built this project. First one is, as I say, I have sketches for most of these things, is keep at it. And so I really like this idea from Sketchnotes I read years ago, because you can see it's sketch number 110. Enough molehills make a mountain, which is that if you just chip away at stuff bit by bit, you actually can accumulate a real body of work. And obviously in the sketch I talk about the good side of that and the bad side of that, but literally on the left there is what kind of happened to me. I kept chipping away from sketch 110 onwards, and eventually it made enough to be in a book. But it takes a long time, and it takes some application to keep at it. The other one I wanted to share was a reflection about sharing. And I've often think about this, that actually so much good stuff happens, which was unexpected for me as a benefit of sharing my work. And I know that I guess this was before I knew about, Austin Kleon's Show Your Work, but I often think like sharing often feels risky for a lot of people, which is true. People might respond in different ways. But there's a couple of things that happen. One is if you put your name on something and it goes out in public, you try and make it better because your name is now on this. You're responsible for that. And then the other thing that happens is, which I've experienced time and time again, is that you get unexpected benefits from this. So somebody that you completely had no knowledge of or interaction tells you that they're using these with their students in your class, and you're like, oh wow, that's amazing. That would never have happened if I hadn't shared. So my second tip is to share your work, and you'll be surprised what happens. And the last one, I saw Dave was here, and actually it came from a discussion with Dave about what is this process that I've been doing, and I really liked it. It was this sort of gem finding and polishing metaphor, which is this is the process. And I think there's a lot of value in this for many of us in different aspects of our life, which is, first of all, like training yourself to notice. So now I have to say I'm just tuned in all the time about, oh, that would make a good sketch. Oh, I should share that. I should add this to the list. collecting these, doesn't matter how you do it. Can be a simple notes file, and then periodically going through those, sifting them, processing them, and then sharing them. And it's amazing if you think about the amount of different projects which are actually this really simple process where it starts with just noticing and collecting, and then there's an aspect of sort of post-processing and polishing, which really makes something that can be remarkable. So give it a try. And then just very last thoughts. And Zolt mentions about Bill Gates. Well, I was reading Bill Gates's book on climate, and I was reading this book, and it had very few, if not no, images. And I was thinking people need to understand this stuff. So I was like, I could like a set of images, and then I was like, maybe I should ask them permission. So I got in touch with their team and said, would it be okay if I did a set of images on this? And they said, hey, we really like your images. Kind of missed the boat on the last book, but we're working on another one, which turned out to be his book about how to prevent the next pandemic. And you can see, if you come through a bookstore and you can flick through it, you'll find that it was a really lovely opportunity to be able to try and share some of the quite dense information that's in there. Some of the, it's a big book, and go, how can I make this more accessible for people? And so I'm really grateful for their team to give me a chance to do that. This is one explaining the difference between an outbreak, an epidemic, and a pandemic in a visual, rather than reading, multiple pages. And as he said, when therefore, when my book came out, I tried my luck and I sent Bill a copy in his team, and he was kind enough to say some lovely stuff about that. But it all came from sitting down and reading this book and going, you know what, people could understand this better if there were some visuals. So let's see what happens. And it's also, there's unexpected benefits. So my very final thought is around Sketch 900, I did a bit of reflection about why I'm doing this and what motivates me for doing this. And this quote I learned from Brenda Oyland, who wrote this book, If You Want to Write, was, what is the purpose of existence but to discover truth and beauty and share it with others? And I just think there's so much in that, whether we're writing, whether we're talking, whether we're just sharing stories with friends and family. And it's such a joy to do. And I feel like if I think about what the essence of this project is, and what the essence when you see somebody who's doing great work and keeps sharing it, there's this joy in discovering truth and beauty and sharing it with others. So that's all I had to say. That's the project. I hope it was interesting as a journey. If you got any questions, I think we got time for that now, and I'd love to address them, because there's probably a ton of things that we didn't talk about.
So, Jono, you want me to help facilitate this, or you're happy to read them out loud?
It would be great if you're happy to help facilitate, because I haven't been able to keep up.
Okay, so the first question here is by Kevin.
Yeah.
So, did you learn drawing with that one sketch a day, or were you already drawing before?
Yeah,
because they looked quite good, the drawings you had there.
Well, you'll see. I just deliberately showed some bad drawings, some badish drawings ones here. But yeah, I know I did, and I have always been interested in drawing. It was one of those things where I always liked art, but I was never the best at art. I was always good at science and math, and Sketchplanations is this lovely way that I can combine these two things. But I have always tried to keep improving my ability to visualize things, but not so much so that I'm making art, as I said, but really about like how can I whip something up so that somebody can understand what I'm trying to get across as quick as I can. So I have studied drawing, but I've never done any significant training except for on the job drawing. And you know what? I've improved a whole lot by doing this for the last 10 years. And I probably spend a bit more time on them than now. I call them sketches, but they were definitely sketches at the beginning, but I spend more time on them now.
Yeah, and there's a sub question which also resonates with a question I saw in chat, which is about, do you draw on paper and scan, or do you draw on iPad, PC, or redraw on PC? What's your approach here?
Yeah. So originally, as I said, I absolutely drew on paper, and I still love doing that. This is an example in the camera. Hopefully, you can see of just a random page in one of these notebooks. There was a time when I switched, and so now, if you can see that, now I do draw on an iPad Pro, and I use the Sketchbook Pro app primarily. It's sort of a love-hate thing. It definitely allows me to make things better, but it also means I spend way more time on them. And you know what? I sometimes look back at the paper ones and I think those are better. But if you saw, just really quickly, if I switch back to this one here, you can see that you actually see the binding in the middle. This was the sort of quality I would get from scanning my notebook and publishing that versus if I work digitally. And digitally is just so much better, and so much, I'm able to redo it and rework on it. You can have layers. I can fix things when people tell me I've done something wrong. So I think there's sufficient advantages that I work digital now.
Yeah. So the next question here is by Daniel. And so the question is, after all this time, how do you find new ideas to sketch on Sketchplanations? Or how has the process to find what to draw, or how was the process to find what to draw every week?
Yeah, do you know what? I don't have any problem, but that's partly because I was perhaps fortunate enough to stumble upon this ridiculously large mission, and with my definitions of being able to work on things where people are not one-dimensional, I'm not restricted to one specific area. So I literally just have like a notes file where when I spot stuff, I throw it in. I also have many people who tell me good ideas that they've seen now. But I guess I've trained myself so long to notice enough things that I often think that actually one a week is just not fast enough, and I need to do things faster. So I add to my list much faster than I tick them off my list.
Okay, so you have a list.
I have
you have a backlog of ideas.
Yeah, I have a growing backlog of ideas, and so it's a question of like each week is picking
And
the
do you
ones from the
take
top.
notes on those backlog ideas? So is it just a word or an idea, or as ideas come up, do you take notes and develop them over time? So is it like a slow cook or boil, or you pick it up and so this is going to be this week and you then work on it?
Yeah, so there's some parallelism, I would say, that goes on. So on that page I showed you very briefly on the iPad, I actually had about 15 sort of sketches that I'd started but not finished. I also have one that I'm sure that I'm going to do this week or next week. But also, as I'm walking along, I'll often do a discussion with ChatGPT to make sure my research is correct on any other future one, which even though I'm not tackling it now, I can sort of iterate my thinking of it. And sometimes there's ones where it was sufficiently difficult that actually I kind of had it on the back burner working on bits and pieces for several weeks or months before I released it. So yeah, there's definitely a process, but I essentially work on them in parallel. But sometimes you just have sometimes something's just clear and you just got to sit down and just do it there and then. And that's nice. But in practice, I'm working on many at a time.
So there's a related question on AI, so I'm going to bring that up. So are you using AI as an assistant for Sketchplanations? If yes, how? So you mentioned already one thing, to verify research. Any other ways?
Yeah, it's a good question. And the answer is yes, I am using AI now. But mostly a discussion. I think about it as like a thought partner. So I don't know. I don't know what would be a good example here. So let me. Is that still sharing? It is. Let's. So if I go to the site now, so I pick one which is a bit more like sciencey, something like this, I mean, like, okay, I think it's really interesting how a sonic boom works. How does a sonic boom work after all, actually? And so I go, I read a bit about it. And this would be the sort of thing where I would probably have multiple conversations with ChatGPT, and actually I use the voice feature a lot while I'm walking to make sure I really understand things properly. And then typically my process now, and it never used to be this at all. So two things. One is I often send them to my brother to go, does this make sense? Or I try and send him two and say, which one of these is better? Because that's much easier to answer. But very often now, ChatGPT can be those first cut things. So I say, oh, I was thinking of this way, and I'll throw those two images to explain it and go, either of these seem better than the other, and it's quite useful for that. I've not found it yet that I can throw it in and it will do, as I hope, as good a job as me, but I'm sure it's getting there very quickly. I've tried the images, and if you actually really want an image that you specifically want, it's very difficult to get it. But it's getting easier. But as a thought partner, I use it quite a lot, and it's very useful.
Yeah. So the next one is from Dave Gray. Have you ever accidentally repeated yourself and explained the same thing twice?
That's a great question. You know what? I've done it deliberately, which is I did it just very recently with this sketch about paste layers, where my first one was really messy and straight from my notebook, and then I decided, that it needed a proper one. But it turns out, no, I have done this twice. I did it on this silly Japanese concept. I don't know if you know this one, Chindogu. I think it's Chindogu. There we go. So I managed to do Chindogu twice without realizing that I'd already covered it. So yeah, I'm getting better now, and my search is better. And in some ways, in my mental archive, I'm keeping most of these in mind, but every now and then one slips through. Good question.
Yeah, and so when you, for example, looked at Shindoku, so if you compare the two illustrations, what's your reflection? They're equally good. One is better. The first one was better. The later one is better. In what way? So did you reflect on that?
Yeah, usually my more recent one is better. Yeah, in my experience, I've learned more. I've got better at the drawing, and I've got better at thinking about how I'm going to explain something, and I probably spend more time on it. But
Yeah.
you know.
All right. So here's an interesting question from Jerry Michalski. Do your ideas connect to form webs of larger meaning? If yes, do you ever try to illustrate that?
Yeah, I think larger meaning. I don't know exactly whether that's true, but I struggle with that a little bit. Sorry, I don't struggle with it personally, but I struggle with trying to help other people connect these. And I had different ways of thinking about it. And originally, I kind of thought about it as um, a feed. So my initial blog was like, here's one, and then here's another one, and it's just a feed, like a Twitter feed. It was my blog, and that's just consecutive ideas, and they're kind of unrelated. And then I thought about it much more as like a library. So you build an archive, and you go, okay, I'm going to go check this section. I'm going to go check this section, and then more and more, I've been thinking about it as a network. And I mean, I don't know if you've come across Metcalfe's law, so it's not specific for this, but Metcalfe's law is when you add new nodes, the essentially the number of connections increases incredibly rapidly, which makes the network more valuable. And so more and more, I think about the sketches in this sense, that whenever I'm adding a new one, I'm adding to this web of connections. And I've actually spent more time recently doing this. I mean, Eponym is not a bad example, but let me just go back to a really recent one. So this was a really simple visual illusion. But actually, if I think about it, you know what? I've got a number of other sketches about different types of illusions. And then I've also got different things about graphic design and how you can do layout things and the Gestalt principles of design. And I'm trying to draw as many of those connections for people as I can. And there was the talk about using the Brain software, and I was really jealous of that because it does such a great job doing this. And my organization here is wholly imperfect for it. I sometimes do it with categories. So if I think of a category,
you could actually drop these into the Brain in terms of their, the title. You can add the image, and I'm sure Jerry would be game to play with you in making that happen.
Yeah, that would be excellent.
I'm sorry, Jerry, I'm offering on your behalf, but I'm sure. But unfortunately, our time now for the Q&A is up. I'm
sure.
going to bring Oliver on screen, and then we'll have a Q&A section at the end as well. What I ask you to do, that's the participants, is when you ask questions to Oliver, then please add Oliver in the question so I know when I'm facilitating the Q&A who's it's for. So okay, so I think I'm going to take now Jono off and bring up the sketchnote you created. And Oliver, over to you. So,
okay, hi everyone. I have to say that I haven't made a sketchnote apart from one recently. I haven't made one for about 4 or 5 years, so I was really nervous that I'll be able to create anything. But don't let that give you the wrong impression. Every time I do a sketchnote live, I've got no idea if I'm going to be able to do something. In fact, today I recalled a time 15 years ago. I was invited by a government organization, I won't tell you what country, where they had a conference about their new curriculum. And my sketchnote was going up live on a big screen by the side. And after an hour or so, I'd written nothing because they talked nonsense. They were talking just abstractions. From a head teacher's point of view, I thought it was just valueless, empty air. So, it depends on how great the person is who speaks. And of course, Jono's was fantastic. So I never know what I'm going to do. I never know how I'm going to fill the page. Somehow, some part of the brain works out. So you had half an hour, and somehow the half an hour bit kind of filled the page. This is A3 paper, so it's really quite large. A4 opened up into A3. Sometimes I use a very tiny A6 notebook, and I find it drives me right into the middle of the paper. And I find that sometimes helps me think. One thing I am aware of is that, so I come from the hippie era, and I noticed the hippie era, Tony Buzan, mind map, organic, flowy, dendrites, brainy, style is the predominant style. And I really, really don't like it. I think it doesn't help. And I've been in trouble with some sketchnoters because I've said they're too visual. So for the person making a highly visual sketchnote, which is politely call it organic. By organic, I mean there's no alignment. It doesn't comply to any graphic rules. There's no titles and no hierarchy of information. It's just like organic, man. For the person doing it, it feels very good. Whether they go back and can understand what those depictions denote, what the concepts were, what the details were, I question. But I really question whether they're useful for anybody else. So there's been some people who try to introduce it into education, and they're really not successful because there's no knowledge there. It's just impression of the sketchnoter. The colors, the visual interpretation of some interpretation of an interpretation, which is personal. It's not public. So that's to kind of put forward my unpopular against the tide view of what a sketchnote would be. So with regard to this, I did cheat. Though I talked to Jono before, it's not cheat, it's preparation. But normally when I do live sketchnotes, in a conference, they're 40 minutes. And when I first started, when I wanted to make an impression in teachers' social media, I said to myself, I'm going to do an A5 sketch note, photograph it, and I'm going to tweet it, and it's going to arrive in the participants' phones before the presenter sits down. So I gave myself an incredible challenge, which I find exciting, and I managed all the time. So for other people, they found it, they couldn't understand that a sketch note could occur in the moment and be complete before the presenter sat down. And I don't really know how I do it. Although I don't know if this makes any sense to you. You know Etch-a-Sketch? They were around when I was a kid in the 60s. They're quite popular. There's like a little screen and you've got two knobs and it moves a bit of, actually you don't know what I'm talking about, do you? I can do a perfect drawing somehow coordinating my left and right hands, and I've no idea how I do it. So that's kind of an analogy. I don't know how I do that, other than I do know alignment really helps. So squared or dotted paper helps. I do know as best you can, if there's possible to get some kind of hierarchy. I didn't really manage it there. I do know you need to use very limited color. In fact, I've only used red once because I didn't really have enough time to do anything else. And generally, unless you have really, really good lowercase writing, and nearly everybody I know hasn't, especially at speed, then uppercase will always be more readable. And then you have to put words on it. I mean, if you know anything of the research on dual coding, and Alan Pivio, his research is probably the most thorough in cognitive science. It's the power of words and images, because we have two processing modes. There's like the language mode, linear, and the non-linear visual mode. And so it really just makes sense to use both of them, because with an image, it's such interpretation. You take those words out, and I could spend more time on the drawings, but the drawings would have taken too long. I would have added more detail, but the reader, and even myself later, I'd just be guessing, what did I mean by that? In fact, what does it mean? What does it show? So really, I've really got a strong argument for generally more words than pictures. And the pictures, this is so rushed that the pictures aren't really explanatory to an extent. I mean, the manager versus the maker. I've kind of done something like that before, so that was in my library. I sought to draw a person split. So, one way their logistics and managing, and next minute is like a different mind frame. So if I did this again, which if you want to do it, I could do this all over again, a lot neater. I'd spend more time on the drawings. I'd kind of accentuate the concept I try to depict in the moment. The thing I can't understand that I do, given all I know about limited working memory, is at some stage I take a risk. I say, this is useful. So this is a risk, because I'm estimating how long the presentation is going to be, how long I think this bit has just started. I mean, when you start talking about the engineer's mind, I've read a book on engineer's mind and thinking, so I thought, for me, that's a good way of capturing it. I didn't have time to put down PhD, Southern California. So I thought engineer's mind, that would help me and it would help someone else. And after I put the word E, I thought there's no time. I haven't got space to do the same big letter for engineers. So I wrote engineers. Then afterwards, as I was doing the scene down below, which is too close, I thought, oh, man, I could make that into a bit like a cog. All the time, part of my mind is thinking, you're missing something, Oliver, you're missing something. Don't spend too long on it. So it's really rushed. I'm going in and out, which used to be very stressful, but I quite like the thrill of nearly missing something, half hearing it, finishing it, thinking that doesn't look good when it's finished, but I've got to listen to what comes next. So it's a real thrill. In fact, Jono, I'm going to add it as, I'm not quite sure whether it's type 1, 2, or 3 on the fun scale. I think it's a cognitive level 2. Okay, right. Shall I answer some
Yeah.
questions?
So maybe we can also move into questions, and there's a question from Hillary. Do you traditionally use this style of person, or were you trying to emulate Jono's style?
No, that was definitely trying to use the image that Jono has in his books. Um, here,
You want me to bring up your other picture with your?
yes, show my original ones. I've got a book. Yeah, I've
Yeah,
got a
so
book
these ones.
which I did quite a serious study, but it was private. My father was a Tintin fan, Tintin. You know, he read it in the 20s, and so I love Tintin. I know him inside out, and I was trying to analyze why his cartoons are so good. I've got a top secret, by the way, which I'll tell you at the end if I remember. But here, I deconstructed all the details, the clothes, the figure, the volume, and I just drew this figure, which is a mixture of Don Moyer and the great Dave Gray. And I transmutation, I transmitted, like with X-ray vision, I drew what I thought was underneath, what was the skeletal Hergé. That's more or less taken from Don Moyer. Anyway, if you take the other one, I did this afternoon. I thought, after such a long time, I didn't know I'll be able to write anything down, so I better prepare a bit. So I converted those images into Jono's style. So you can see that's taken randomly from my book. You can see how I did learn something really terrific from Dave Gray, and it is to show dynamism, make sure the hips aren't over the feet. So you have a sense of loss of balance and toppling over. The secret I learned, which I've never told anyone, so I'm holding my breath now. The secret of Hergé's Tintin comics is in every scene, the characters look each other in the eye. Even if Tintin's walking away and he hears a sound, he'll turn around and he'll have eye contact with the villain hiding behind the curtain. And it's that eye contact that makes it live and dynamic and human. So there you see at the bottom, I've got two examples of a person split. So that one on the left-hand side, I think I used at one stage to show, I would have put a bubble above the middle person thinking now and then looking back in the past and then using that information in terms of projecting or predicting the future. Yeah, so that's the answer to that. That was my conversion.
Yeah, awesome. I'm looking through here to see, and maybe John, I'll bring you to the screen as well, and then we can just look through the.
Well,
Yeah,
can I
so
ask a question? Obviously, I'm dying to ask Jono. Did that kind of capture? Given it was live, I mean, if I had an hour or 2 hours, I'd do something different. But
Do you know what? It's amazing, and I love how easy you make it look to add people to things. Because whenever I speak with people, it's always like adding people to their drawings, which is the one which they're worried about doing and they find hard doing, and you just make it look so easy. And also, I was thinking like, how am I making an impossible talk for Oliver to sketchnote? And so turns out, no, I'm not. It's amazing to see all those, including where you've sort of summarized like a whole area of it into some thoughts. So I'd like you to send it on afterwards if you can. Love it.
it's because you're well organized. It makes a big difference when the speaker's organized.
Yeah, by the way, I discussed with Oliver upfront, so I'm going to be uploading this image to the events documents section, so anyone can download it.
I'm making the drawings darker because I didn't realize it's a little bit light there, so I'll go over it. Might even add some red.
Awesome. Yeah, by the way, it's also interesting. I learned the dog Neil from verbal to visual. He has this video about the brick road approach to sketchnoting, which actually looks very much like this. So he says each each sketch should contain a single idea, each square, and you place these squares on the page. The rectangles can be any size, but when you put the next rectangle, it should touch the previous rectangle, and every rectangle should contain a single idea, and you use image and text to do it. So this looks very much like Doug Neal's brick road approach.
Well,
But
just had an idea though. For example, if you had a column on the right hand side that was empty and you put a number on each of these bricks, these frames, you could say number 2 and number 7 together. What's the meaning when they're abutted together, juxtaposed? So you could then go back and then start elaborating your thoughts about it.
Yeah, there were also some comments in the chat in terms of the benefit of doing this digital. So creating a sketchnote like this digital is you can more easily rearrange. So does that ever come to mind, Oliver, or you're actually happy with not being able to rearrange?
For a couple of years, I used Apple Pencil, and I could never get anywhere near Dave Gray's facility with Procreate, or I think what he used, or something else. So I used some Japanese, very, very, very easy to use. I hate learning digital stuff. I find it so tiresome. So I found that really useful. I enjoyed it. I really, really dislike the lack of friction of the pen on the glass. And I tried the, what's that German company, Light Paper. You put a film of plastic on it, so you add a bit of friction. Being involved with teaching handwriting for children, I know the secret of handwriting is pencil on paper, because there's friction. And in a school, the worst handwriting seen are by teachers, because they're on a whiteboard with a whiteboard pen. It's all slippery, and their writing's awful. So you want friction. You really need friction. It restrains you and gives you feedback. So I may go back to sketchnoting digitally. I do enjoy it.
Awesome. I mean, and maybe let's do one question for Oliver, one more question for you, and then Jono, maybe one more question for you as well, and then we will need to wrap up. There are 2 questions at the bottom that I think are addressed to you, Oliver, and they are related. So what is the magic of the live time pressure? What's happening in your brain, hands, eyes as you draw? And there's a next question is more life problems gives humans more idea?
I used to really dislike experts who are unwilling to share how they create what they create. If you don't do that, all you end up doing is showing off your cleverness, which is fine, but no one learns much. Having said that, I'm guilty of it because I don't really know what's going up there. I think I described as best I can the constant refocusing of right now and somehow listening to what's going on and being alert to a danger that there's something important and different going on. Then I'll have to leave that for the time being. But I'll make sure that what I'm working on has got sufficient down there. So, for example, if there's a list, I'll put, for example, starting off with questions, people, and ideas, I put down QUE, PE, and then ID. And if I had time, I'll go back and finish off those words. Mm-hmm. So you're making these minor decisions all the time. You need to get comfortable with the discomfort of making questions, and they could be the wrong ones that you made.
Yeah. And as you now went back and you added black to the figures, so I think there are different ways of going back. And
what I've never done, which is really interesting, say, and I'm not suggesting it, say you and I have an hour, we look at it and we look to see whether it really does, although he thinks, oh, I've captured something, the bit he really wanted to emphasize, could we do that differently, different wording? Could we make it a different color or make it stand out? And what about the links between them? Or is it sequential? So there's lots of interesting ways that you could develop it. I guess much like an architect would sketch something out first. Mm-hmm. Sketching ideas out. It's a basis for a conversation.
Yeah, awesome. And then our final question, and that's Jono to you, that's from Stephen Anderson. So do you ever feel compelled or pressured internally to investigate a topic you're not at all that excited about? So question behind the question, how do you prioritize from your backlog?
Yeah. So I did put a note on that. There's a little bit every now and then I'm like, you know what, this I've not done one on that, and it should be there. I should have one on that, even if I'm just not the thing I'm most excited about doing right now. I remember doing one of those with Maslow's hierarchy. I'm like, wow, it's mad that I don't have one on Maslow's hierarchy. So I just did one on Maslow's hierarchy. But there were many more things that I was actually interested at the time. I was just like filling in the gaps. But that said, it was still worth doing. I've also done many commissions, and I find, what drives me is having that aha moment, that truth and beauty discovery, and then trying to share that with others. And so if I'm not getting that, I definitely find that it sort of becomes a bit like work when I'm doing it that way. But yeah, I don't know. That's what I have. Sometimes mostly it's when I feel like there's a gap and I'm like, that's crazy, I need to fill that gap. But there's other things I'm more excited about doing.
Awesome. Jono, Oliver, this was a blast. It was fantastic. I enjoyed it so much. Thank you for joining. Thank you for being here. And for all of you listening, it was also fantastic. So your feedback in the chat, the questions, your engagement is great as well. So we have one more session today with Nick Susanis, Thinking in Comics. That's going to be an amazing talk as well. So hope to see you there. And for now, we close this session. Thank you.
Great to meet you both.
Thanks so much, everyone. It's a pleasure.
Jono Hey started the journey, a simple sketch a day, a decade of ideas to chase the clouds away, turning big complex thinking into lines so neat, from software through education to concepts you can meet. Well, being science bias, the encyclopedia grows, little pictures spark the insight everyone knows. He built this visual world, a simple hand-drawn art, to communicate with clarity and wisdom for the heart. Now the story unfolds, a special session to see the power of a drawing for all the world to be free. Oliver is listening, his pencil is prepared, visual synthesis of all the wisdom shared. Skechplanation, decade of drawing the world, call hand clicks to clarity, the visual flag unfurled. Oh, Sketchplanation, a decade of drawing the world, memory and understanding in every single view. Oliver, the head teacher, knows how our minds recall. Cognitive limits matter. He answers Jono's call. The work must be explanatory, not just decoration. Visual clarity, alignment, and careful segmentation. He avoids the working memory overload and the mental strain. Guards the white space, keeps the focus so the learning can remain. A live sketchnote master, building structures true, showing how abstraction helps me and helps you too. Now the lines are all finished, the talk and questions done. Oliver reveals his drawing beneath the morning sun. He walks us through his choices, the pedagogical clue, showing how to synthesize and make the meaning new. Oh, Sketchplanation, a decade of drawing the world, rolled hand press to clarity, the visual flag unfurled. Oh, Sketchplanation, a decade of drawing the world, memory and understanding in every single view. Sketchplanation. angle view. Draw to think, don't give up. Simple pictures, big conversation. It's on our style. Say no, this is. Say no, this is.